In 1922, a test pilot flew over Dayton, Ohio, and subsequently watched his airplane fall apart in midair. He had no ejection seat, there was no backups, only an experimental device that had never saved a pilot in a real emergency before. Welcome back to another installment of This Week in Aviation History. My name is Jim, and let's get into it. Today, parachutes are standard safety equipment for many military and experimental pilots, but that wasn't always the case. For years, many aviation leaders believed that parachutes were too heavy or too complicated, or may even encourage their pilots to abandon their airplane. That debate ended after one terrifying moment over Dayton, Ohio. So in the early 1920s, McCook Field in Dayton was the center of aviation experimentation for the U.S. Army Air Services. Engineers tested things like new aircraft designs, new engines, new flight controls, and the list goes on. Only a few years earlier, inventor Leslie Irvin would develop a parachute system designed for intentional free-fall jumps. In 1919, Irvin would be the first to demonstrate the concept himself, becoming the first person to make a deliberate free-fall parachute jump and deploy the parachute using a ripcord. It was revolutionary, but there was still one big question. Would it actually work in a real aircraft emergency? The answer would come on October 20th, 1922. Lieutenant Harold Harris, the chief test pilot at McCook Field, was flying a Loening monoplane while evaluating experimental control services. This flight began normally, and then at about 2,500 feet, the aircraft began to shake violently. Moments later, the situation turned catastrophic. Harris would have just seconds to react. There were no ejection seats in 1922, so the only option was to climb out of the aircraft and then trust a parachute system that has never saved a pilot in an actual emergency before. Harris would climb out of the cockpit and jumped clear of the falling airplane. As he fell away from the wreckage, he pulled the ripcord and the parachute deployed. His silk canopy opened up above him and slowed his descent. A few moments later, he drifted safely down and landed in a backyard in Dayton, Ohio. It was the first time in history that a pilot was saved in a bailout by an emergency ripcord parachute. This jump made headlines, and reporters joked that Harris should start a club for pilots whose lives were saved by these silk parachutes. Well, the idea caught on. The Irvin Airshoe Company eventually adopted the concept and created what became known as the Caterpillar Club. The name itself came from the silkworm, a tiny caterpillar responsible for producing the silk used in early parachutes. Membership requirements here were simple. To join, all you had to do was survive an emergency bailout using one of his parachutes. Over the years, thousands of pilots have become members by simply escaping a damaged and falling aircraft. So why does this matter? Harris's jump proved something critical. Parachutes weren't just an experiment anymore. These were a life-saving device. Soon after, parachutes started to become standard equipment for many military aviators and test pilots. And over the decades, they would save countless lives in the air. One aircraft failure over Dayton led to one historic jump. And that jump helped make parachutes a standard safety device for pilots around the world. Well, that's it for This Week in Aviation History. If you like aviation history facts just like this one, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.